All right. So I just kind of wanted to start first with a little bit about Chrysalis. Chrysalis is a nonprofit over in Santa Monica. We're located on Lincoln Boulevard, and our mission is to really support folks with employment. And we believe that employment is such an important component, and so we provide different resources and support to find and retain that. We do that by having a series of classes, as well as resume appointments, practice interviews, working with an employment specialist like myself, and then providing different resources such as transportation and interviews, interview clothing, things like that, so that someone can be successful within their job search. We have completely shifted all of our services to remote. So we have been utilizing video calls, phone calls, emails to really stay in contact with our community to make sure that we're able to support everyone while they're looking for work. So today what we're going to be covering is, as I mentioned before, what is a resume? Different types of resumes, a few do's and don'ts when it comes to resumes, things that you should really be including and things that you should be keeping off of your resumes, as well as how to include non-traditional work, and then some additional tips. So to start off, what is a resume? Essentially, a resume is a way to market yourself. It is an opportunity to highlight your different skills, your accomplishments, what you've done, and let an employer know why you're a great fit for their organization. Resumes ideally should be tailored for each position that you're applying for, so that you're able to pull out specifically what they're looking for that job. Is there something that they're highlighting or emphasizing a little bit more? And that should be included in your resume if you have done that or are able to do that. So you really want to make sure that it's being tailored for each position, because you want to grab that attention of the specific employer or company that you're applying for. With resumes, you typically see two different types of resumes. Chronological resumes are your traditional resumes, the one that you're going to see the most often. It's probably one that you already have and have used. Ideally, with a chronological resume, you're using it when you have consistent work history, minimal gaps or no gaps within your work history. You've worked in a single industry for your entire career. That's a lot of the times when you're going to be using chronological resumes. I really stress that this should be the format that you're using, because it's the one that employers are most used to seeing, and the ones that they typically would prefer to see. But we recognize that sometimes we don't have that. We don't have consistent work history. Maybe we're switching careers with a major shift. And so then you're able to use a chrono-functional resume. As I mentioned, this is really great if you're changing careers, you have large gaps in work history, maybe you've had a lot of different jobs or a lot of different temporary positions, and this chrono-functional resume allows you to highlight more of your skills and credentials first, and also highlighting more relevant work experience. So what I would like to do is to be able to show you what those two resumes look like, as well as what some bad resumes look like, as well as what some good resumes look like. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to that? All right, so it looks like no questions right now.
No question. Yeah, no question.
Okay, perfect. So over here is a bad resume. Okay, is everyone able to see this? I know that Stephanie and I were talking that it may be a little too small, because I can always make it bigger if we need to.
Yes, could you please, someone said that it is small.
Perfect. All right, so let me just go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. All right, so over here is what we would consider a bad resume. Is this better?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Perfect. So I put some arrows, and we'll kind of work our way from the top and then work our way down. So right at the top, you'll see contact information, which should be included in every resume, which is good, but you want to make sure that the hyperlink isn't included. So when the hyperlink is included, your email will automatically turn blue, and then we'll have an underline. You want to make sure that it's consistent formatting across. Okay? In a resume, you'll see a summary of skills, but what we're missing here is, okay, management experience is great, but you want to include how many years of management experience, right? Proficient in various computer programs, you want to make sure you're listing what computer programs you're proficient in. As we keep scrolling down, you'll see that there's a spelling error. We actually see this a lot. A lot of times when we're typing really quickly, we may not even recognize it, but it's really, really important with resumes to be proofreading our work. Another thing that happens a lot in resumes that sometimes we don't catch is you want to make sure that the fonts are the same. So here you'll see that there's one font and then another. A lot of times if we're copying and pasting things, we might not even catch it. So it's important at the end while you're editing to just copy your entire text to make sure that everything is the same font. Another big thing that happens a lot with resumes that we see is inconsistency with our dates. So you want to keep the same formatting. You can either, abbreviate or shorten the month, or you can spell it out, but decide on one thing and keep it consistent throughout your entire resume, or else it looks sloppy. So instead of kind of doing one or the other or not including months, stick to one and then keep moving forward. Additionally, you want to make sure that your spacing is consistent. So if you take a look over here, the dates should always be all the way to the right-hand side of your document. You want to make sure that that's all the way there. You also want to make sure that your spacing is consistent in between the different jobs that you've posted so that it just makes your resume look clean. Another question that I get a lot of times too when we're taking a look at resumes is, do we put periods or do we not put periods at the end of each bullet? Ultimately, it's up to you on whether or not you would like to include them or not, but it just goes back to being consistent. If you are going to use them, they should be throughout your entire resume and not stopping at some point, including it for some and not including it for others. Another thing with resumes that you don't want to see is realistically, your resume should only include work experience from your last 10 years. Employers really only want to see what you have done recently, and 10 years is kind of the span that they're looking for. The only time that I've really seen there being an exception to the rule is if that work experience was extremely important for the kind of position that you're applying to now. Maybe you're switching careers and you want to highlight that this is actually something that you did earlier on in your career, then you did something else in the middle, and it's something that you're stepping back into. But just being mindful that if it is that far back, it can sometimes outdate ourselves. And also they might not consider it as necessary to see because it has been so long ago. So those are some things to kind of take a look at when we're looking at a bad resume. Now on the flip side, this is the exact same person. So this is the exact same person, but with a good resume. All right. So if we scroll in here, it has the exact same experience, but what you'll see is there's no hyperlinks, so it looks a lot cleaner. You see that we now know how many years of experience that it has, and it's a lot more impressive, right? An employer doesn't have to search for that. They know the first thing they read when you read your resume is, wow, they have 15 years of experience within this. This is someone who's really qualified for the role. Additionally, you see that they get very specific with what kind of programs that they're able to do. Any kind of programming that you know, a specific software, be specific, list that there. We cannot assume that an employer will know that if we just say various computer programs. In this resume too, you'll see that the dates are consistent and lined up the same way. There's no spacing errors between employment, at the end, or margins. And so just overall, it has a more consistent and clean look. And I'll reiterate that quite a few times because I think that's some of our biggest things with resumes is just making sure that we're editing it appropriately and formatting it appropriately. Now, the biggest part when we're coming to resumes outside of editing is the actual content that we're including. Something that you didn't see on the bad resume and something that should absolutely be included in your resume is quantifying numbers quantifying information when applicable, and adding achievements, not just the tasks that you did. Realistically, anyone can put a list of tasks, but it's important to state how you were different in that role or what you provided to that role. So you'll see here under the first arrow, this individual exceeded retail sales goals by 17% every quarter. That's something that they specifically did to bring benefit to the organization that they worked at, right? If we go down to this one over here, you see that they hired and managed a team to deploy a new data processing platform that was ahead of schedule. That was something that they did specifically in their role, right? Another thing is they've quantified the information. So they interviewed, hired, and trained 40 new staff members, right? That's very different than if it was one staff member. So it just adds a little bit of scope and scale to the work that this individual did. So whenever possible, it's really important to quantify it. So if you are, a way to quantify that is how many patrons are you seeing throughout the day? If you're working on a certain project, how big was that project? If you're working with a budget, how much money was in that budget? If you're supervising people, how many people did you supervise? If you've interviewed or hired folks, how many folks is that? It can really, but it is really, really important to show that scope and scale. Does anyone have any questions about these two?
Shell is asking, do resumes have to have an objective?
So objectives are no longer included in a resume. It was really an older trend, and now what you're seeing is a summary of skills or a professional statement. That's a good question. Any other questions?
Yes. I've read that the period following complete sentences and no periods are for fragments. However, I just read to use all sentences or all fragments. Would you agree?
Oh, interesting. That's something that I can do more research on. Typically, when I was trained, it was either use one or the other, and just to make sure that it's consistent across. But I will put that down on my list, and I can send more information on that.
That wraps up our questions so far.
Okay, perfect. So then over here, taking a look, this is what a chronofunctional resume would look like. This is not something that you would typically see or typically use. You'd really want to use that chronological resume. But what you'll see is that there is a summary of skills right at the top, and you're including things that wouldn't necessarily be included. So if you have a specific license, if you're bilingual, that wouldn't be included up there. This person hasn't worked in over 4 years. So that's why you'd use that chronofunctional resume, because they're stepping foot back into the workforce and they're trying to highlight specifically their kitchen experience. So that's why they brought that at the top. And then you'll see that their other work experience is just kind of listed here, as it's not as applicable for the current career shift that they're trying to get back into. So that's where the chronofunctional resume looks a little bit differently than the chronological resume. With chronofunctional, this area can also, instead of stating relevant work experience, it can say functional area of expertise. And so let's say someone has worked a lot of different temp jobs and they did the exact same thing in all of those temp jobs. It would be very repetitive to put the exact same things under each job duty. So you can put functional area of expertise, janitorial, list all the different things that they've done under janitorial, and then go ahead and list the different work experience here.
Excuse me, Jacqueline. Can you zoom in a little bit for them?
Absolutely, yes. So that just kind of goes over that summary of skills right over there at the top that I was mentioning. And then over here would be the section where you would just put the relevant work experience, or you would go ahead and put a functional area of expertise. Then you would be able to go ahead and just list the other work experience without necessarily putting bullets or tasks underneath, and then ending with that education and professional development. So the last resume that I wanted to show you is something that folks often ask of whether or not to include creativity or not. And so it's a really interesting thing because some folks say yes, some folks say no, but majority say that if you're going to use a creative resume, the typical industries that it does really well in would be technology industry, technology, marketing, startups. Those are places where a resume like this would stand out in a positive way. If you're applying to big corporations, if you're applying to, let's say, like banks or legal, this resume would not do well. Another time that this resume or a creative resume would do well is applying for small businesses or companies that have under 25 people. The reason for that is because they have found in research that when companies have about under 25 people or so, it's usually the general manager that's directly reading it. It's not going into any software. It's not doing anything like that. They are visibly seeing it, and so that helps with making it stand out in a positive way. So there is a website that we use called Canva. I've included it in one of my last slides. And so it has a ton of different resume templates. So if you are looking to step into a creative career, or in a career where, maybe you're going into a small business and need something to kind of spice up your resume, Canva is a great way of adding that to it.
Okay, I have a couple. Shell wanted to know if the chronological type of resume is a good resume to use. I guess that template.
Yes, for the chronological resume, that would be the template that you can use. If it's something that everyone's interested in, I can also send a few fillable templates that include the basics of the formatting and editing, and you can put in your own information.
Oh, that would be great. Fillable template. Okay.
Perfect. Okay, I'll make a note of that. Mm-hmm.
The second question from Myra is, how would you include a multi-month one-time project?
Does you mind explaining that a little bit more?
Just waiting for her to respond.
Okay, no worries. I've also included my email and my phone number at the end of this presentation. So if anyone has specific questions about their resume, please feel free to give me a call or send me an email, and we can talk about your resume specifically. So that might actually be a better idea. And we'd be able to speak then, and I can even see and talk a little and hear a little bit more about what that specific experience is. How does that sound?
That sounds good, but Miguel wanted to know, do you charge for resume services?
No, we do not. All of our services are completely free.
Completely free, okay. And Jenny said, is it appropriate to include volunteer work?
Yes, it would be. So volunteer work, if you're finding that maybe you don't have a lot of work experience or your volunteer work fits very well within the kind of position that you're applying for, as long as it still fits within one page, then including your volunteer work on the bottom, creating like another header, just saying volunteer experience, and then being able to include that can be a really great asset, yes.
Okay, Myra said that if she was a part of like an event and she dealt with budgets and organizing with presenters, I guess that's what she's asking about. If it was a one-time project, how much information should she include on her? Mm-hmm.
On the resume. I think it has to go with how big the project was. If it was something that was your main task and role within a job, I would say that should have a few bullet points underneath your resume. And just because it was a one-time project, it's still important to include it because it sounds like you had a lot of great experience of organizing things, calling guest speakers, getting things set up. So that should definitely be included. If that didn't answer it, I would still be more than happy to talk with you after to discuss that in a little bit more detail. But it sounds like that's something that would be great to include on your resume, and maybe even including a few different bullet points for it underneath that position.
Okay. Shell, so with the volunteer work, is a chronological resume good or a chrono-functional type of resume?
Would it be just volunteer work, or does it have other work experience? Because what I would say is if it is, honestly, with either, you'd really want to use a chrono-functional resume if there has been consistent, if it's been back-to-back, if there's been no gaps. If you find that it's been gaps in between those experiences, or they haven't been really consistent, or there hasn't been that much, that's when you would then want to turn to that chrono-functional resume. If it's been a long time, or if there's been a lot of gaps.
Miguel said, do you help out with writing cover letters as well, and what makes a good cover letter?
Absolutely. So as Chrysalis, we do help with writing cover letters. I would really encourage you to just reach out to me after, and I can talk a little bit more about some of our other services. Cover letters are really important. Just to kind of touch on it, cover letters are really important when applying for jobs. You want to make sure that that you are including one, simply because our resume does a great job of explaining what we did, and our cover letter explains how we did it. So in the cover letter, it also, you're able to express your personal interest for a position, and that can make you stand out from other folks. So what you'll see in the cover letter is it includes how you found the position, it lists 2 or 3 skills that directly apply to the job and how you did that job, and then it ends with your personal motivation for applying and kind of a call to action of what you would like to do next, or ideally what you would like to happen next, which would be an interview. But yes, to answer your question, we do help with cover letters and writing cover letters. I would just really encourage you to reach out to me after, because there is a template that I can send as well.
Sounds good. That wraps it up for the question.
Perfect. So just to kind of go over some resume do's and don'ts, which I've mentioned before, but this just kind of helps summarize it a little bit more, is it's really, really important to keep your formatting consistent and simple. When you're writing your bullet points, you want to make sure that you're starting each statement with a success verb or an action verb. So if you were taking a look at those, a statement doesn't say, I swept the floors, it said swept floors, right? Or you want to make sure that it's always starting with a verb, because when someone's reading your resume, they're really only looking at it for about 10 seconds and they're scanning that left-hand side. You want to make sure you're catching their eye so that they want to read more. So an action verb is you did something, right? You engaged, you performed, you supplied, you called. There's some kind of action to what you did. And a success verb, it's something, that's where it's, you increased, right? You increased performance. You completed tasks at a certain rate. You want to add a little bit more depth. A lot of times those success verbs you see when you're listing your achievements. Another thing is you want to make sure that you're using correct tenses. So if it's a job that you've had previously, you want to make sure that you're in the past tense. If it's a job that you still currently hold, then that is when you would use the present tense. So just making sure that that is correct when you're going through. As I mentioned before, quantifying when possible, using those numbers. You would write the actual numeric value when you would not write out the word for that number. Additionally, you want to make sure that your headings and your name stands out. So you would bold, italicize, or capitalize it. You want to make sure you're only doing one of those. You wouldn't do all 3. A lot of times we have questions about fonts. What is a good font? What we've been seeing in current trends is you want to be using a modern sans font. So those are things such as Calibri, Arial, Helvetica, and Verdana. Times New Roman is not being used anymore unless you're really applying for like a legal job or a corporate job. That's considered a little too traditional. And so you'd want to stick with one of these 4. Something that we're also seeing as a trend is using color when appropriate. So it kind of goes back to that creative resume. For a lot of the smaller companies that are applying to, color can actually make it stand out in a really positive way. The only times that you would use color in it would be as headings or for specific names. You wouldn't want to turn your whole resume into a rainbow. And then lastly, as I mentioned, you really want to target for a specific job or industry. That's what's going to make your resume stand out, because they're going to be able to see that it's tailored specifically for that position. I always encourage folks that I'm working with of when you find that job, the job description is a cheat sheet. That's exactly what they're looking for, and that's exactly what they want to see. So if you've done that, make sure that you're including that, right? You might not have thought of that originally as an important thing within your job, but if they're including it, it means it's important and they want someone who can do that. So you want to make sure that you're highlighting that within your resume. In terms of some things that you don't want to do with your resume is you don't want to include a reference section, and you don't want to include references available upon request. That is no longer asked for. Similar, you're not going to be including an objective statement. What they found was that objective statements weren't really helpful because everyone was saying the same thing. I'm looking strong professional looking to grow within a company and add to their achievement. Really was just taking up space and wasn't unique to each individual. So they're saying skip the objective statement completely. You also want to skip some resumes. You'll see fancy graphs, pie charts, illustrations. That really should not be on your resume. It should be kept clean and simple. You're going to see templates that do it, but unless you're going into the tech industry, that's really not something that should be included. You also want to make sure you're not going over one page. Every resume can be fine-tuned into one page because you want to make sure that it's relevant specifically to that job you're applying for, and it really is only that past 10 years of experience. And so you want to make sure that you're including the appropriate information. Another thing is you don't want to use cliches like team player, hard worker, unless they are directly from the job description. Because then it just seems like we're copying and pasting certain things, or we can't think of why we're a good fit for that job. And then lastly, as I've emphasized and stressed before, is just to really make sure that you're editing your document. There is a difference between one who is edited and one that is not, especially because our resumes aren't looked at for that long of a period of time. The first thing that folks are going to pick up on is if spacing's weird, if you have a lot of different fonts and sizes. So you want to make sure that's nothing is distracting an individual from your qualifications and what you've done. Does anyone have any questions about the do's and don'ts of resumes?
There. On the cliches, what should we put in?
Yeah, so that just kind of goes back to the job description and looking specifically at what they are looking for. You do want to make sure you're including some of your soft skills. So a team player is great if they are looking for somebody who, the job requires working with a team. They specifically state, we need somebody who is able to work well with others. Then include team player. But you don't want to include it just to include it. So it goes back to really reading over the job description and see what they're mentioning and pulling from there. That's what you would then include.
Okay. Christian asked, should your resume be limited to one to 2 pages?
So the resume really should stick to 1 page. The only time that I've seen it really go onto 2-page and that it really couldn't be put onto 1 page is someone who was on a CEO or executive level. Realistically, a resume should be moved down to 1 page. You can play with your margins a little bit too if you feel like you're running out of space or changing to a different font amongst those 4. Additionally, you really don't want to go down any size smaller than 10 because you want to make sure it's readable for the individual that you're looking for. So really, really, really try to get it to 1 page, because if you're thinking if they're only reading it for 8 to 10 seconds, they're not going to flip over to that second page. So you want to make sure that you're only including that relevant information and keeping it to 1.
Kelsey asked, can we have slides or a PDF?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Should we use slides or a PDF? I guess
perfect.
We have a portfolio. Yeah.
Understood. So if you're submitting your resume, I always encourage folks to submit it as a PDF. The reason being is PDFs are being able to be opened across all different kind of computers and software. So if somebody is using a PC computer and someone's using a Mac, an Apple computer, they would still be able to open that. For folks who only use Apple products and they have a software called Pages, it doesn't open on PCs, and that can be really frustrating for both you and the employer. So I always encourage to go ahead and submit it on PDF.
Jacqueline, I think the question that was a really good point about the PDF, but the question really, she meant, can you share your slides or a PDF of your presentation so that we can share it with staff?
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely send this to Stephanie after so that she can distribute amongst your staff. Perfect. Any additional questions? All right.
It looks like that's it for now.
That looks like it for now. All right, perfect. So just another additional thing that I wanted to touch upon for folks who maybe have non-traditional work experience, it can still be included on your resume. So if you're really struggling with finding something to put on your resume, let's say you don't have a lot of traditional work experience, you can include under the table work, so any work done for family or friends. It would be labeled as self-employed when you're putting the position where you're putting the employer name. Same with caretaking. You can include that if you're taking care of a family or a friend, it would also be labeled as self-employed. And then also work while incarcerated can be included. Instead of putting the name of the prison, you would put the employer as the state. So for example, if someone was incarcerated in California, the employer's name would be State of California. And then just some last tips and resources. When you're doing your own resume, ask yourself a lot of questions. Because sometimes it can be difficult to think about, what did I do? How did I do it? But it's important to think, like, what was my day to day? How did I start my day? How did I, what did I do when I first went into the office or I first went into work? And then what did each hour look like? And I always start when I'm writing my resume is writing a master resume. So I just throw everything onto one sheet of paper, no matter how big or how small the task was. I think about every project that I've done. So that question about projects, right? Every project that I've done, I throw on there. And then after, when I see a job, I'm able to pull specifically and say, these are the things that are the most important to include. So in that way, I'm not forgetting anything. I also think of those questions of, what were my achievements? Was I ever given an award? Did I increase productivity? What are those different things that I did to benefit the organization? And then how can I quantify that? So those are the questions you should really be asking yourself, because that's really what's going to make you stand out against other people who are looking for work. Lastly, you really want to make sure that you're leaving at least 5 minutes at the end of each time you're working on your resume to just go ahead and edit it. There's always something that we can catch and improve. Just making sure that all that formatting is correct and keeping it clean and concise. Really, really important. And then the two resources that I wanted to just leave you with was Canva, which is the one that I spoke about before, where it has templates to make more of those creative resumes. And then ONET. ONET is really great. I'm not sure if you've heard about it before, but ONET is a great way of learning more about a specific career as well as the tasks and duties within it. So let's say you're really struggling with, maybe you had a job that was 5-6 years ago and you know the gist of what you did, but you can't really remember what that day-to-day is. You can type in the career and then it'll give a list of typical tasks and duties for that position. And sometimes it can just help us remember the different things that we've done. I know if you asked me what my day-to-day was in my job 5 years ago, I wouldn't remember every single detail. So sometimes being able to search it just helps kind of remind me, oh yeah, I did that too. Oh, I forgot that was a huge part of my job. So it can help with making sure that our resume is in-depth and includes really good information and highlights our different skills and experience. But that is all I have. I just wanted to thank you again for inviting me to speak with all of you. On the top right-hand corner, you'll see our Chrysalis website. It talks more about the different kind of work that we do and how to get connected if you are interested in working with somebody like myself directly. We currently, as I mentioned, all of our services are remote. So we have a 1-hour class that talks about what does job searching look like amidst COVID-19, what is happening with the industries, who's hiring, things like that. You would then be able to work with someone to create a resume and do a practice interview. We do have a short orientation to kind of talk more about services, or you can reach out to me directly. And that is my work line as well as my email address. I am available from 8 to 4, so please feel free to reach out. I would love to help in any way that I possibly can. And thank you.